Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. A controversial Chinese Grand Prix, the Max Verstappen wins at a canter, but a couple of safety cars and big drama emerging from the top to the bottom of the field. Lando Norris with an impressive P2, but Lance Stroll and Ricciardo with a major coming together at one of the safety car restarts. Ricciardo not a happy man, and understandably so. What was looking like a big bounce back weekend for him, squandered by a major mistake for Lance Stroll. Stroll though disagrees that he made a mistake, and Ricciardo certainly letting me know what he thinks about the situation. Very much on Twitter, your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, before we get into the race, big update today on a change to the point system. We've talked about this on the channel before, that giving out points for the top 10 is the way it's been now for some time, but arguably it's not enough anymore. The cars are too reliable, and maybe not too reliable, right? But they usually finish the races, and it becomes very difficult now for teams that aren't in, the top 10 to get any points. So there has been a discussion now for some time, even just in the community in general, about extending points up to top 12 rather than top 10, which honestly might be a fair adjustment given the current state of Formula 1, and it would mean that, guys, let's say Yuki Tsunoda last year, he had so many P11s at the start of the season, wasn't able to get rewarded for it. So this is the proposed system that might be introduced from next year and beyond, depending on what the teams think about it. I imagine that a fair few teams would probably be in favour of this, but I guess we'll see what you guys think in the comment section below. So it basically is the same from top to bottom, well, from the top. So it's 25, 18, 15, 12, 10, 8, 6, 5 for 8th place, then 4, 3, 2, 1. So instead of going to 1 at 10 and 2, 4, 6, 8, they've got a couple of extra points, 2 points for 11th, 1 point for 12th, and then of course, fastest lap, you get an extra point if you finish in the top 12, so if you finish in the points and get the fastest lap, you get an extra point, which is how it's now been for some time. So yeah, what do you guys think about this? I'm sure some of the teams in the midfield will be pretty happy about this development. The top teams probably don't really care too much because the top of the point standings is still going to be the same, but it's a proposal, and to be honest, maybe this is a bit of a precursor as well to having another team on the grid. That's probably wishful thinking, but if there was to be an expansion with 22 cars on the grid, then definitely 12 getting points would make sense. So hopefully if that was to occur, that would still be the case. Let's talk about the race though, right? Because I think it was pretty funny how this went. Max Verstappen was leading by like a second and a half by turn 4. Like, it was ridiculous how fast this car is here, and especially in Max's hands. Now, Perez did have a harder time, and it was quite an interesting race strategically, certainly when the safety cars came around. But yeah, this is the start of the Grand Prix. Fernando Alonso though, what a move he made around the outside. It was great to see the moves around the outside of turn 1, and of course Hamilton was making some progress with the field as well. He made some really cracking moves in that sector 1 as well, because the car wasn't really good enough to get it done in a straight line. But Fernando Alonso here just sends it round the outside of Checo Perez, takes P2, but unfortunately it doesn't last forever, right? And this is the thing, that Aston Martin is strong in qualifying for sure, and in the race for the start, but it doesn't seem to have the tyre wear that some of the other cars have. And they do seem to struggle with that slightly as the race progresses, and it's been a consistent trend now for this Aston Martin so far this season. Perez gets him back without too much difficulty, and then Lando Norris does the same, right? So it was impressive to see how the McLaren performed today, especially with respect to the Ferrari, because I thought it was pretty clear, and even Ferrari seemed to say themselves they were pretty convinced they would have a strong weekend here in China. Red Bull, I think, were always going to be a step above, certainly at a track like this, that just, everything is built to favour the Red Bull, and it's a track that typically will have big discrepancies between the best and the worst cars. That's certainly the case this weekend. But I thought Ferrari should at least be second, and they were reasonably competitive on most tyres. But the surprise for Ferrari and for Leclerc actually was exactly why they were so slow on the hard compound tyre. It looked like Leclerc and Norris might be able to do a one-stop, and the safety cars kind of put pay to that strategic idea. But when they put the hard tyres on, the Ferrari, they just weren't fast and didn't have good deck. Norris, though, was again really impressive today. And sure, he obviously put it on pole for the sprint race, didn't get the result that he wanted there after the turn 1, turn 2 incident with Lewis Hamilton. But today he drove really well. But again, it's like another great Norris performance that doesn't yield a victory. But the McLaren was very strong. A car that wasn't so strong was the Mercedes, right? Hamilton was struggling on the soft tyres at the start. He pitted after like 9-10 laps to get onto the mediums. That did work better. And Hamilton did say a fair bit on the setup decisions that he made, like talking about how he, changed the setup, messed around with it after Parc Ferme kind of opened up again after the sprints, where he was fine, but it's like he was still a second a lap off the pace of the Red Bull. The reality was, though, in today's Grand Prix, that if he had been a second off Verstappen's pace, that actually would have been probably competitive enough to be fighting right up the order. So I think Hamilton felt like, well, I couldn't even touch Max in the sprints. I've got to change some things going into the race and qualifying for the race. Obviously didn't work out for him, and he was struggling with the car. He was actually stuck behind an Alpine. I think it might have been Gasly at this point. Maybe it was Ocon. He was behind Ocon at one point anyway. And he's like, yeah, I can't even catch this guy. The car is just way too slow. But then the race gets interesting when Valtteri Bottas, and you got to feel bad for Bottas because, again, he's put in some stellar performances, stuck it into Q3, was on the verge of maybe being in a points-paying position. Can you believe it? Sauber actually did a respectable pit stop for him today with like a 3.0 seconds, but then his car conked out. Now, he was stuck here. I'm not going to lie. I'm surprised they didn't throw a virtual safety car immediately. They just like yellow flagged this. And then all the marshals ran over and it was stuck in gear to try and get rid of the thing as it was just yellow flagged. And I don't know, I thought it was a little bit strange that Valtteri Bottas was just walking away with no virtual safety car or anything and just yellow flags. Thought the stewards could have done a better job throwing that one earlier. But they threw the VSC. And then they realise they can't move the car, they have to throw the full safety car. Now, it was very interesting strategically at this point because Norris and Leclerc were both potentially able to do a one-stop here. And as soon as the first safety car comes out, that was all the virtual safety car. Perfect timing for Leclerc to come into the pits. And I think McLaren were concerned that the VSC would disappear by the time they got to box and get a bit of a freer stop, which is what they ended up doing. The thing is that the safety car restarts, which honestly at this point it was looking pretty nice. Verstappen was able to pit as well. But at this point, this is when the drama happens, right? I would also say for Red Bull, like the level they're performing at on a consistent basis across the board is ridiculous. Like their pit stops over the last 2 races, I don't think they've had a pit stop over the 8 stops they've done in the last 2 Grand Prix that was over 2.1 seconds. I think it's been 2.1, 2.0, 1.9. Those have been their pit stop times over the last 2 Grand Prix. Just absurd levels of consistency. But this is the Lance Stroll show. And you guys remember last year I was doing Donkey of the Day for a little bit, and for qualifying in the race, we're going to have to bring that back because it's got to be Lance Stroll today. So he just slams into the back of Daniel Ricciardo here, and it was so unfortunate for Danny Rick because Tsunoda was doing okay, but Ricciardo was genuinely in a good position today. He had solid pace, he was able to, keep Hamilton behind or be on a similar pace to Hamilton, and that obviously was good enough pace to get points. But this is the safety car restart. Verstappen goes at the hairpin, right, which makes sense because of traction out of that corner, all these other things. Alonso actually locks up going into this corner here. So he slows down, the car behind him slows down, and Stroll just rams it into the back of Daniel Ricciardo. And you can actually see from this POV right here, as Stroll is coming up to the back of him, Stroll's looking at the apex. I don't think Stroll is even really looking. I mean, you can see here, he's not looking at Ricciardo. And then all of a sudden, he's right behind him, slams on the brakes, and it's not enough, and he just fires Ricciardo up into the sky, damaging the rear of his car. And eventually, Ricciardo had no pace and had to retire after the second safety car restart happens. So this is just such a basic mistake that you can't be making. Under a safety car conditions, what are we doing here? And obviously it breaks his front wing. He has to come into the pits, get a new front wing, and he kept soldiering on, and he had a bit of a battle with Magnussen later on, which was quite entertaining, but it was for basically last place. But yeah, Ricciardo, this was a big weekend for him. Bounce back weekends, he'd done well, out-qualified Tsunoda in both situations, was the stronger driver at RB this weekend, which is massively important for his intentions to keep his seat and try and get the Red Bull seat, which is not impossible. Sergio Perez has done well, and he's got a fair few podiums so far this season, but he wasn't exactly mesmerisingly good today. And of course, because Stroll punts into the back of Ricciardo, he then goes into Piastri, who then got damage, and Russell wasn't hit, Alonso got away with it as well, and the rest of them were fine. Just to note on Alonso, they put the soft tyres on, and I think the idea was, well, run the soft, we'll see how it goes, but he was never going to be able to get to the end of the Grand Prix there. But most guys at this point were going on these hard tyres to the end of the race. Verstappen as well was pretty mind-blown at watching this in the cool-down room at the Max Verstappen podcast after the race, thinking like, what is this guy doing? And understandably, there was lots of reaction here, certainly from Ricciardo, but Stroll for some reason wasn't so convinced. So he got a penalty for this, obviously, 10-second penalty, and when he was told about it, he said, unbelievable, man, such a joke. He also got 2 penalty points on his license, which was 1 point less than Fernando Alonso got for that battle with Sainz in the sprint, which was, it was debatable whether Alonso was, deserved to be penalised for that move in the sprint race, but he got a penalty and he got a 3 point on his license situation, right? Stroll only got 2 points for this. I can't believe it. And then Stroll was basically blaming somebody else. I think really who he was blaming was probably Alonso, because Alonso then slowed down and it meant that the rest of the guys concertinaed. But he still should have been way more aware, because this is how it goes. Safety car restarts. Cars are going to go slow. Slamming on the pedal full throttle going into the final corner is probably not the wisest idea. And yeah, Ricciardo did not hold back. I mean, he said the following: I slightly started to calm down and I was told what Lance thinks of the incident. Apparently I'm an idiot and it was my fault. So that made my blood boil because it's clear as day and it's also behind a safety car. The only thing you've got to do is watch the car in front. We can't predict what the leader's going to do. We can't assume that we're going to go into turn 14. The race doesn't start until the control line. So I'm doing my best not to say what I say, but F that guy, and I'm still being nice. So let me just share a couple of clips here.
Yeah, I mean, truth is, restarts, we can't predict what the leader's going to do. So you have to be kind of on, let's say, on edge and as aware as possible, because maybe he goes in turn 14, maybe he goes in turn 15, but, you can't just assume that it's going to restart at turn 14 or whatever. So I could see everyone started to brake for 14 for the hairpin. It was starting to bunch up. So got on the brakes. And then as I started slowing more and closing in on Oscar, I felt Lance underneath me, basically. So I was just told now that apparently he was blaming me for it, and that if that's true, I was starting to calm down, but that really pisses me off, because I watched his onboard, and he's as soon as we start to brake, he starts looking at the corner, and then as he starts getting closer, you can see like he's not even focused on me. And on a restart, you have to focus on the car in front of you. That's the only car. You can't overtake them, so there's no point looking 3 cars ahead anyway. So yeah, obviously our race got ruined by him. Right now it's immediate frustration, but overall the weekend was good, but unfortunately we have nothing to leave here with.
So Ricciardo understandably fuming at what was a very important weekend for him that was of course ended by damage, and the same thing occurred for Piastri as well. He was also a victim here. He got damage that was significant, wasn't significant enough for Hamilton to be able to overtake, but he got very close. Hamilton was 1.1, 1.2 seconds behind, but the dirty air was just affecting him too much. And yes, Piastri says, yeah, sure, like everyone suddenly braked in front of Stroll, but everybody else didn't crash into each other, right? So, yeah, again, putting the blame onto Stroll, and obviously for very good reason as well. So, frustrating to see this one, and it's just another one of those cases where Stroll occasionally he has his own day. And, I mean, usually what it is for Stroll is he'll put in one good lap in Q1, and that's it for the weekend. He's done for the day. Like, after that, he's out in Q2, and he's having a terrible race. And Alonso, maybe on a different strategy, could have been in a better position here to even finish higher up the order, but he still did a respectable race at the end of it, and Ricciardo's race was ended when points were definitely on the line. So, yeah, weird to see that Stroll was complaining about this, to be perfectly honest. Totally get the frustrations here from Daniel Ricciardo. Sargent as well, I think he overtook Hülkenberg under the safety car, so he got a 10-second time penalty. I mean, this guy is just shocking. There's no pace, there's no result. He went from last to last, and honestly, he's not far off getting the maximum penalty points and therefore getting a race ban, which would not be great. There was also this that happens, so got to feel bad for Yuki as well, because the RBs were respectable today. They honestly were pretty similar in pace to the Mercedes of Hamilton, which was pretty bad, and probably to the Mercedes of Russell as well, to be fair, further up the road, although Hamilton talked about the setup we'll discuss in a second. But this was Magnussen making a pretty big error here, to be fair. Understeered coming out of this corner, clipped Yuki goes round, he was out of the race. Magnussen got a puncture, and his race is basically over as well. Then there was, of course, the pit stop that Alonso had to do. Look how sideways he is right here as well, coming out of the final corner. He thought he was going to get the run on Lewis here. He didn't. He had to wait a little bit longer, but Alonso still bounced back quite emphatically. But there was questions on Ferrari today, because I said in Suzuka, if Ferrari can be within 0.3 of the Red Bull, which pretty much they were, that should be nice for them going forwards, because they've got this big Imola upgrade on the way that they believe is going to unlock, 2-3 of a second. But yeah, Ferrari somewhat confused why they didn't have the pace today, because I'm sure they wouldn't have expected Norris to be the guy getting seconds, and even Norris himself said after the Grand Prix that he had a bet on with his engineers as to how far ahead of them they would finish, and it turns out they finished way ahead the other way around. Cool for Joe as well. He got his own little celebration here in front of the crowd when he got to kind of drive up, and it was really nice, honestly. The crowd there in China is just absolutely fantastic. But this was the Grand Prix result. Verstappen won by only 14 seconds. Would have been more had there not been a safety car with like 20 or so laps to go. He would have won by a mile today. And Sergio Perez, it was interesting for him because he was miles off Verstappen. Even before the safety car, he was like, I think 20 seconds ahead of Perez. And sure, Perez's strategy was maybe somewhat compromised by the safety car situation. But even then for Norris, I think Norris was thinking he could have done a one-stop, and I think that would have finished ahead of Perez, and he just straight up had more pace. So yeah, Perez in the race pace today was kind of nowhere, but it's like there was nobody else that was close enough to make it work. Piastri's pace as well was pretty weak, I'm not going to lie, compared to Norris. I know that Rosberg mentioned it on the comms, that Piastri's tyre deg still isn't really anywhere near Norris's, and I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago to say, alright, when's Piastri going to really lock in this tyre deg situation? Hasn't happened yet, and there's questions whether it's, to be honest, ever going to happen. But yeah, so Norris ended up second. Leclerc and Sainz were 4th and 5th respectively. Russell then got 6th because Alonso didn't have quite enough time to get him back. Hamilton ends up 9th actually after a decent recovery drive, but the car was a bit of a shocker. And then 3 DNFs, both RBs out, and yeah, Ricciardo is probably the key one to note right there. There was some comment, of course, on this from Mercedes that Hamilton was pretty satisfied in the end to get to the points with the car that he had. And as he says, yeah, I went forwards and I got into the point. It was a tough race. I made a bad setup change to the car yesterday and I paid the price for it. I'll make sure I don't do that in the future. The car does seem to work in a small window, and I did think it was the correct thing to do. Made today difficult. Team did a great job with the pit stops. George did well to score some solid points. Miami should be better, but it's like how far Mercedes have fallen, right? From even like 2022, when the debate was, well, okay, Mercedes aren't great this weekend, but they might still pick up a podium, whereas this year, like P6, P7 is a solid result for the Merc. Like, it's a straight up midfield car. Toto wasn't happy about it. He also wasn't particularly happy about the way that Hamilton went about things, and Hamilton says, yeah, I won't make that setup change again. And Toto Wolff was also basically saying that the guys, basically talking about Lewis, need to stop trying to find the silver bullet, which I understand that perspective. Like, his thoughts are now, right, let's just maximize what we've got, which is probably fair, but I don't think you can blame Hamilton trying to find something, because Hamilton ain't here to finish P9, P6, even P2. He wants to win races. Clearly, the car isn't capable of doing so, but as he says, we made too many extreme changes after the sprint, and the most important part of the weekend became much more challenging, so today's result isn't strong enough. They did mention Mercedes. They've got an upgrade plan for Miami, which apparently is going to be a good step, so we'll see if that does anything. I mean, I'm not going to lie, given the recent performance of the Mercedes, difficult to have that much confidence that any of their upgrades are going to do anything, whereas you might for a team like Ferrari, but they're going to wait until Imola to bring their relatively big change that they believe is going to unlock some time. The question for Merc is, after Jeddah, certainly after Australia, there was debate as to whether they actually have any idea what they're doing. Like, do they know what is going to improve their car? It's difficult to say. Hamilton seems to think that they might, but it's a question for the Mercedes engineers to figure out when we get to Miami, I suppose, but not their greatest result, of course. Hulkenberg as well, got to mention him because he got a point today. This just quickly from Nico Rosberg. We talked about driver rumours a lot leading up to the weekends, and it's still a big conversation. So apparently Sebastian Vettel might be considering a return if the stars were to align. Let's be honest, it's probably not going to happen. The chance of him going to Merc or to Red Bull, it's like way less than 1%. But apparently Seb is interested if it was to be a top drive. Merc are only offering Sainz a 1 year. So the rumour has that maybe they're offering him a 1+1, but of course, if it is a 1+1, that would be on Mercedes' decision if they wanted to extend it, I imagine, because clearly Antonelli is in the radar. So Sainz has to make a call. He's obviously not going to go, he's not staying at Ferrari. Didn't have a particularly good race today either. Leclerc pretty much comfortably beat him today, especially after the safety car. Like, the gap that he pulled on Sainz was pretty impressive. But the thing is, for Sainz, like, if the Red Bull seat isn't available because they keep Perez, and I'm not still so sure that they will. I think the gap, especially today, between Max and Checo was not really acceptable if there's a more competitive opponent, which there was in Norris. But, you know, theoretically, other guys maybe should have been up there as well, and I'm sure the Ferrari think that they should have been at least where Norris was, challenging for second place. Apparently, Sainz is getting offered too little money at Red Bull, because we know that he's got this mega offer from Audi. But still, if Sainz has discussions with Red Bull, again, this is what this says, right? We talked about it the other day, that apparently Red Bull are offering something to Sainz. And if Red Bull are offering you a drive, like, it's really difficult to say no, surely, given the strength of that car. But if Audi are offering, like, insane money on a 3-year guaranteed deal, then maybe that's more attractive to Sainz, because if you say no to that, then are you going to get that offer again in another year or two? And the Mercedes might not make that much sense either. So still some questions on that, but very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.